is a lifestyle. Sports cards and we live now. Jeremy Lee in the building and every guest that you ever needed. Sports cards after hours keep the hobby heated. Updates, hobby talk like you never seen it. Sports cards live and none could ever beat it. Sports cards is a lifestyle. Sports cards and we live now. Welcome to another episode of Sports Cards Live with your host, Jeremy Lee.
All right, everybody, and here we go. Welcome to episode number 218 of Sports Cards Live. It is Saturday night, February the 24th, 2024. My name is Jeremy Lee. I would like to thank everybody who tuned in last week with our guest, Coach Co. You can check that episode out on the YouTube channel. Next Saturday, slight warning, I'm not yet sure if there's going to be a show. I will be away on vacation. I'm taking the setup, but we'll see how the whole environment is and if we can do an episode. So stay tuned, watch for notifications on YouTube and of course on my Instagram account as well. Now, I would like to ask you to please join over 500,000 people who have downloaded the Center Stage app across both iOS and Android for quick comps and accurate card identification. The Center Stage marketplace featuring super easy listing and reasonable, transparent fees is coming soon. So please join me in supporting the great team they have, the innovation they are undertaking, and let's help make Center Stage a great place to buy and sell singles. Also, please use protection and practice safe swaps. VeriSwap is an app and middleman service that lets you trade cards securely through the mail. Every transaction up to $1 million is guaranteed by their guarantee. You can check them out on iOS and Android, and join me and VeriSwap founder Raymond Lee on Instagram Live every second Tuesday for the VeriSwap Trade Desk. Tons of fun that little 10-15 minute show is. Also, please welcome Filth Bomb Breaks to the sponsor crew here we have at Sports Cards Live. The team at Filth Bomb offers live case and box breaks, and as we learned, they do so with integrity and responsibility. If you enjoy group breaks and are looking for a company to break with, check out Filth Bomb. They are streaming on Fanatics Live, 4 channels, 7 days a week. I want to shout out Hobby News Daily for your daily content feed, and Leighton Sheldon, Just Collecting Vintage Breaks, will be joining us for the Vintage Spotlight segment shortly. Also, you can now buy and sell tag-rated cards on ComC. Pokemon, Lorcana, and other rounded corner TCG cards are now eligible for grading. Visit taggrading.com if you value transparency, consistency in grading. Thank you, as always, to all you loyal viewers, podcast listeners. If you're not yet subscribed, please take a moment and do so. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, your questions and comments are in play. So let's get to it. Tonight's guest started in the hobby in 1997 when his father took him to a card shop, bought him a pack of 96 Finest basketball. He pulled a Kobe rookie in what was the first pack he ever bought in his whole life, and his brother convinced him to trade it to him for an Allen Iverson rookie card. He's been in the hobby ever since, and every paycheck has a portion of his paycheck going towards cards. In 2019, he started applying his data analytical skills to sports cards and launched his YouTube channel, Pancake Analytics, in 2020. His favorite players of all time, Patrick Ewing and Derek Jeter, and his favorite teams of all time are the New York Yankees, New York Jets, New York Knicks, and the New York Rangers. He's originally from, you guessed it, Brooklyn, New York, currently hailing out of Tampa Bay, Florida. Let's bring him out. Tom Ferrara, welcome to Sports Cards Live, buddy. How you doing?
Doing great. Really excited to be here, Jeremy.
I'm really excited to have you here tonight. Tom, Pancake Analytics. I think we have to start with, the most obvious question, which is, what are Pancake Analytics? Pancakes. You like your pancakes and maple syrup? Tell us about that. Let's kick it off.
Yeah, great question. So pancakes have been a family tradition every Sunday. Come from a big, large Italian family. There's 5 boys, 1 girl, and just to keep everyone together in Brooklyn, we'd have pancakes every Sunday. Then, it stuck with me all my life, and once you're stuck to something, you start looking for it in other aspects as well. A lot of my live presentations on analytics, collectibles, happen actually at Comic-Cons. It also has happened at the National. And so how I've incorporated it there is I found, comic book panels where Deadpool cooks pancakes, or Pokemon where pancakes is integrated. So I kind of went backwards, extrapolated it, and said, oh, look, pancakes is in everything we do. So pancake analytics, you get the full meal here.
A nice, simple, real nice explanation right there. Makes good sense to me. We're going to get into, a bit about your hobby history. We'll get into your professional experience, expertise, what your credentials are that make you a data analyst. I'm not sure what degree that requires, but you'll tell us. Then we're going to get into the meat of the episode. But I want to say hello to the chat, which I do every single Saturday. Phil Daw, first of all, he leads right out and says prices for hockey card singles is abysmal. Will this change in the next 5 years? We're going to get into how you and your models, your data models predict these things. Jake Dahl, what is going on? 86 is here. Frank Costello, good to see you, pal. Thank you. I'm glad you like the studio. I'm very happy here. Al Terwell, Waxstat, what's going on, buddy? Ronnie, the Rascal Superdog, first time. Welcome to the show for the first time, Ronnie. Glad you are here. We got Linda's first. Michael is with us. What's going on, Michael? Jeff McMahon, Todd McDonald, Zach Swisher. The professor is here. Mike Truman. Been a while. These are not giant cards. They look like giant cards, you guys. These are actually original paintings, each and every one of those. And just to give you a little bit of a peek, if you're first time here, I got more up there as well. 20 all together. And I love having them here with me. 90s hockey collector, what's going on? Robert Scott, good evening to you. Bob Boozle says, this episode will reveal whether we eat steaks or ramen noodles. Let's find it out. Steve Splenda says, shout out. Welcome to the show, Steve Splenda. Bob Boozle, Mrs. Butterworth is held in high regard in the Ferrara home. There you go. Pancakes ain't just for breakfast. Jerry Hodge, what's going down? Skeppy is here. Found treasures. Lauren Florio is here. Good evening to you and the Currency Project. Thank you for liking my background, guys. It is new. Took about 515 live streams to get into a new studio, but here we are. Back to you now, Tom. Tell us a little bit about your hobby history. I mentioned it in the intro before you were even on the screen. Give us a bit fuller of an explanation of that, and then we'll get into your professional experience.
Yeah. So a really personal collection is Knicks, Yankees, Jets. Currently right now I'm collecting Jalen Brunson cards, because, really big superstar of the Knicks. He actually wears my number that I wore in Little League. I'll say I won't even act like I made it to any competitive level, Italian, Brooklyn. But yeah, the hobby history, you mentioned just picking up when I could with every paycheck, budgeting, so already you get the analytic mindset here. Oh, the guy actively budgets. He probably has a good sealed collection. It's analytics. So yes, I keep sealed boxes. The goal is one day opening up with my son and my daughter. And hopefully, there's some players that are still relevant, good to pull from this era. Who knows? That's always up for debate. But it's also about collecting moments for me. So I'm going to age myself, right? So the prime watching of the Knicks for me in my childhood was the 90s. So got to see Ewing finally make it when, Jordan was retired and loses to Olajuwon our one shot. That was a great series. But yeah, so it's really hearted in the 90s and that nostalgia. And it's really has lasted through till now. There was no dips, no breaks, just a lot of fun and diversity.
Nice. I love it. I, like you, didn't take really any breaks since the 80s. I slowed down the second half of the 90s, which is now my favorite era of cards. I wonder if that's a coincidence or not, but it is the way it is. You mentioned a goal of yours is to one day break those unopened boxes, that unopened wax or product with your kids. I've got a run of unopened O-Pee-Chee hockey packs from 70 to 89. And I've always said, if I don't decide to sell them first for some extraordinary reason, I've always said I won't. Because people are always like, how can you not open those? Well, I like the packs. It's all about the pack for me. But maybe like on my deathbed, I will crack open those packs as, a last hurrah to life, really. But we'll see. Hopefully that's a long ways away. Tell us a bit about, what your experience is, your formal education that allows you and gives you these insights and skills to build models to predict card values into the future.
Yeah. So I have a master's in business specializing in forecasting, data science, machine learning. I've been in career analytics for over 10 years now. I've worked for Walt Disney World Company, doing their inventory forecasting. I've worked for L'Oreal USA, inventory forecasting. So you see there's a lot of like actual application of forecasting. Currently now I work for a marketing firm specializing in customer segmentation across all verticals, working with very diverse data. Nothing's as diverse as sports card data, in my opinion. We'll talk more later on about the interesting data I append to not only sales, but to really forecast that behavior. But it's a lot of just doing what most will dare say that you can't do or won't do. I do it for a living, predicting the future, crystal ball.
Right on. I love it. So you have a career and you also spend a lot of time analyzing data, building models, building reports, and publishing them for the hobby. How much time do you spend on analyzing data for the hobby?
Yeah. So obviously the career job is top priority. So when I analyze data for the hobby, it's usually early in the morning when I wake up, but I'm doing it daily, or it's the weekend or do a late night. There are luckily tools out there that have the data already nicely cleaned for me, i.e. like Card Ladder. They do most of the segmentation work, and then I can run models that I have from the career life ready to go. So I put out a really high quality product, I feel, on my website, and it looks like, oh, this must be taking this guy months, but it's like I do all the rep work in the day job, been doing it for over 10 years. So hopefully, I've made something really complex seem really easy, but easy to follow as well.
Because what's going on behind the scenes is very complex. I'm sure you're using all sorts of advanced Excel functions and you're building formulas and other, advanced stuff that most people aren't really doing. So that one of the beauties of Excel, I'm guessing Excel is one of your tools. I mean, maybe you're using something even more advanced, but one of the beauties of a software program like Excel is that you can have all the complex stuff in the background and then pop out the reports and the data that you want to share, because, not to bore everybody with all the assumptions and the underlying, everything that's underlying that it would just be over everybody's head. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. So I never want to limit myself how I can answer a question. So Excel is definitely one of the tool sets. Mostly I'm using Python and RStudio. And what those are, they're open source advanced statistical software you can use. But there's definitely answers and solutions in Excel too. If you're in the jam, if like the day job took longer than I expected, or it's like, oh, I have to, get something really clean right before the national.
Just go straight to Excel. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
It's funny to
Yeah.
think that Excel is the simple way when you're using things like Python, which I don't even know about, but I'm sure it sounds very complex and intricate, and you need some skills to use it to build models and such. Let's say hello to the loud collector, Phil. What's going on? I like this 86 as another great looking guest with the same haircut as Jeremy. Starting to see a trend. Yeah, we go to the same barber. Foul 5 balls here. What's going on? Michael says the key to keeping unopened wax unopened is to make sure you have all the cards in that set first. That's a good advice right there. Jeremy M., what's going on? Mark Santucci, I fly out tomorrow morning. Steve Splenda said, can pancakes predict if I'll buy more KD cards? Can you? I don't know that you can predict an individual's behavior, but you can predict the general's behavior. Is that right?
The general behaviors, and I don't want to spoil too much what I got cooking in the kitchen, but I'm actually working on more like individual predictive products. I call them more of like quality of life ads. I'm actually doing a proof of concept with Patrick Ryan has been kind enough to let me use his data. So we're going to see if we can build like something really cool for collectors. And
interesting.
that's a use case, Steve.
There you go.
Can I predict your behavior?
Phil Dahl wants to know, did you use TerraPeak for your data? And maybe just let us know what do you use for your data, or what inputs do you use? You mentioned Card Ladder earlier. Any other ones?
Yep. So definitely TerraPeak. TerraPeak now stores up to 3 years. What I really like TerraPeak for is, so not everything in Card Ladder has an index yet. Like I've consulted with them on 3 indexes, but also when I'm looking up sealed product or I want to get really specific with my queries, like I can just hit the TerraPeak API. Also, when it's more of like the non-sports side, I'll hit other APIs as well. So just about the other data sources I can pull in, TCG player. I know it's not sports related, but I don't want to limit myself to one data source.
Sure.
Another good one, so 130 point as well. They'll do API feeds.
There you go. Jerry says Excel is fun, but I'm using Lotus 1, 2, 3 at home. Good stuff. And Jason Wormy joins us. What's going on, buddy? Happy birthday to you. All right, Tom, let's talk about what you're actually doing here, predicting future card prices. You're building models. You know, I've got a couple notes here, things like player performance, FOMO. Why don't you, just tell us a little bit about how do you do this? How do you predict? What assumptions are you making? How do you take historical data and project it into the future? Do you include macroeconomic issues as well, implications, interest rates, predicted interest rates? How team performance, player performance? Do you add in any sort of adjustment for the chance that a player does something stupid and has to be bought out or has their contract terminated? We've seen some of that in hockey in the last few days. There's a whole bunch of things. I'll let you just sort of go with that.
Yeah, great. So every analysis I do, every model I build starts with what collecting question I'm trying to answer. And that'll determine what caveats, what assumptions I have to make. I do have a couple of reoccurring analysis, so we'll start there. Once a month, so monthly I'm producing a forecast. The method is called Holt Winter's Time Series. What's really great about using that approach, it takes into seasonality into account. It's basically triple exponential smoothing. So it takes in level and average. I know we're both going to be losing hair after this conversation. My beard's going to fall off, right? So, and what's great is like when it comes to sports, there are seasons, not just cut and clear, off season, on season, but think of football cards, the draft, you see a spike. No matter what sport it is, you'll see spikes in July thanks to the national, a lot of sales activity. So this model is really great at predicting sales. So that's where it's like I got to throw my biases out the window, not focus so much on like I'm trying to predict, say, Gretzky cards. Really, I'm predicting a sales product. So that's where it's like, okay, I know this model's going to work. The more specific caveats on those assumptions on financial behavior, player performance, I do that through scoring models. So instance, I have an NFL propensity score that I presented at the National, and it takes player performance and tries to predict if trading card values will be above average. And what's really interesting about that, it tells us behaviors about collectors as a whole that we might not know. And sometimes it could be like, yeah, Tom, you didn't need to run that model. But what I like to think is here's some data background for you, some power to your punch of just those questions that keep you up at night.
Okay, man. Lots there. I wish I could ask a really smart sounding question to build off that, but I'm just going to admit that I can't. Most of that was somewhat over my head. But what I did catch you say was that you will build a player performance model, which I guess then feeds into the overall direction the hobby is going, your all your assumptions, everything else, all the data that you're using to build into the future. Let me ask you this, generally speaking, we see lots of charts ever since the advent of Card Ladder and other data tools out there, and the rise of Instagram for the hobby and the ability to just put out these quick little graphics. We see a ton of them. How much does historical data drive the future? Like, because I'm sure you've got I'm not saying I'm sure, I'm going to assume you've got some weightings that you apply to different types of data inputs that are going into your model. If you go back in time on card values, you go back 20, 30 years, you're going to see lots of cycles, lots of ups and downs, and of course the biggest one came during the pandemic. So how heavily weighted is past performance and the timing of the cycles, the time between cycles, and how that has changed over the years? How important is that to your predictive models?
Yeah. And see, look at you. You're asking the smart questions. So that is 100% like the seasonal element that comes into play. So that's the best value in using historical data, is to pick up like the seasonality. Now, let's say if you had a data scientist who also isn't a collector like me, like if you didn't collect, you would answer your question, Jeremy, where it's just past data, 100% predictive of future data. But when you collect, it's more nuanced than that.
Oh, yeah.
The social media aspect is interesting. I'm just now starting to pull in Google Trends, and I'm finding that's been highly predictive, but it's not that positive correlation like you would think. It's positive correlated that there's more action in the market, but not with values. And what I mean by that is you can scrape Google Trend data and you can search, Gretzky cards, and you can see the trend over time, interest coming in. It kind of flip-flops with his overall value because now there's more buyers out there and suppliers. So I think of all that interesting data to throw in. Historical is an element, but I try not to make it like the only thing, because then I'm not providing any value and I'm forgetting, it's a hobby.
So same question, but on player performance now, because, again, I'm going to make an assumption here. If you are coming up with a predictive model on baseball cards 5 years from now, I'm assuming you're going to be basing that on certain players that are, under the hood of the analysis sort of thing. So for an active player, and even I guess the question would apply to active or retired players, how, in simple terms, please, Tom, how do you use their most recent stats? How do you use a retired player's like career stats to predict what might happen to their values down the road? Is the player's information as important as the overall trends in the hobby, or not?
Yeah. So what my models have shown is that player performance alone, you can predict about 70% of value. Now, some people might say that 30%, that's a pretty big gap. And a lot of it comes because of vintage players, right? There's no recency. There's nothing they can do stat-wise that can drive it through. But another good thing from the models is that accolades matter, right? So if you have a player who, look at basketball, right? Like Stockton's assist record. If we put a high value on that, you can get a pretty good prediction for Stockton's prices over time. Now, what's interesting is it's going to always lean more to that recent behavior active players, just because if you believe performance really does matter, and that could be a heated topic we have, Like, okay, yeah, retired players can't do anything to help it, but you can make the argument they could do something to hurt it, right?
Yeah.
Now you're in the public's eye, public impression. Or think about like when a retired player all of a sudden starts signing more autographs than they ever have before. What does it do to autograph value?
And then how do you and that's something that will be really hard for you to predict unless you have some inside information, right? And you said, retired players can do something to hurt their value. Some players go into broadcasting. Look at Shaquille O'Neal. He's been there for a while. Some players go into coaching. Patrick Waugh, Hall of Fame. Some will argue the best goalie in the history of hockey is now coaching the New York Islanders. Like that's pretty. That puts you right into the forefront. That could help or hurt, depends on, I guess, how he does and how he's perceived by the public in his new role. Yeah, man, this is some pretty complex stuff. I think let's say we got some questions and comments here. First of all, want to shout out Rage. What's going on, Rage? Good to see you. Zach Swisher says what I'm thinking. Triple exponential smoothing. Jameson Riley says collect what you like and favorite players, and predicting future value is meaningless. Well, it's not meaningless in our hobby. It's not meaningless to everybody. It's meaningless if you just collect and don't care about value, then I'm sure it's meaningless. I have cards in my collection, Tom, where future value is completely meaningless because I didn't deploy significant money into them. They're my projects. They're fun. But I've got money. I've got cards where I've put significant money. What is significant to me into cards? I'm not thinking about it that much, but I'd be curious to see. I'm curious to know what they'll end up being worth down the road when me or my estate do dispose of them. But I hear what Jameson is saying, and I think that's a sentiment that's shared. A lot of people are just tired of the talk about values of cards, which has really come about with all the data tools and with the advent or the growth of social media. Anything to say to that?
Yeah. What I would say is, the hobby is an ecosystem, right? I mean, to collectors and your personal collection, you don't need analytics. You don't need data, right? I can do one of the greatest anti-analytics rants ever. Any analyst can do it for you. Now, there are people, and you have to, admit they are part of the hobby. Some people do it for a business, flippers, sellers, breakers, right? And they are the ones that will gravitate to some of the tools I put out there, right? Some of the stuff I do for collectors, like everything I do is not always value based, right? There are some quality collecting stuff I do, Unfortunately, for those who don't like it so heavy on sales data is one of like the easiest data to scrape that's readily available.
Yeah.
Like now, if there was more like collector sentiment, that would be amazing as well. But yeah, collectors, like all the teams I just mentioned that I collect, like I'm not like tracking John Stark's cards for myself.
Here, let's go to some questions here. Skeppy says, are any of your analytical tools subjective or are they all based on objective numbers? How do you separate your opinions from what the data says?
Yeah. So I like to bring in social media data, like what I said. There's always going to be, I have to actually articulate the analysis, interpret the results. So, but removing my own bias, I try to put in approaches that will do that for me. Sometimes I'll do random samples, stratified samples to like make sure I'm not putting that bias into like which cards I analyze. So make sure there's free focus there. But yeah, sometimes the results is head scratching to me as a collector sometimes, like because you're testing hypothesis. And sometimes my results will make me upset because it's like, ooh, I collect in that area. What do I'm predicting a 45% decline over the next 3 months. It's like, ugh.
Yikes.
Yikes. Sometimes the truth hurts.
We got Courtney Reckless has joined us as Tom is a brilliant, goes on to say that it's amazing that he puts all this out on his site for people for free. I think that's very nice. The professor says that Tom is quoted throughout the hobby, including the Marvel community. Michael says, very interesting. Great get. Thank you, Michael. We've got some requests for you to actually give people what's going to happen in the future. I'm just going to ignore those comments and questions right now, guys. I'm sorry, but we're not here to tell you what cards are going up and down, more to learn about him. But the beautiful thing is that now you know about Tom if you didn't already, and you can follow him. You can go to his website. You can read his reports and get all that information later on. But I do want to bring on one just for fun. JH says, who is your model to go down the most? Wembanyama or Connor Bedard?
I'd say probably Wemby can only go down from here.
There you go. There you go. But that answer seems like it's off the
That's
top.
the collector top.
Yeah, that's not based on your data, and that's why we're not going to get into any more of those questions today, unfortunately, guys. But of course, and read his reports. They are there on the website. Bobby Burrell, how much is based on investment over passion? Does that question really, does that apply? I'm not sure. I'll let you decipher.
I'm gonna answer it how I think the question is, Bobby. So, like when I started this, I probably started as most collectors do, is like you kind of make a pro forma Excel ROI sheet for yourself. And then when I started thinking, well, what if I really applied most of my real experience to it and start making products and tools for people? So I'd say it started as an investment. Most was based on investment. Then every once in a while, I'll do an analysis for myself, passion pieces, and you'll see it on the site for free. It's like, okay, Tom's getting really jokey with the results here. Like it's just, he's opinionated. But yeah, I think it started as investment, but there's some passion comes in.
There's got to be, there's passion in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I think the question is more about the model. Is there a way to reflect passion in the model to drive the results? But again, I mean, that's such a subjective sort of thing. It's abstract. How do you really measure passion? I don't know. I'm sure if anyone can figure it out, maybe it's you. Let's do the vintage spotlight segment. Leighton Sheldon is in the back room. I'm going to bring him up. Tom, you've got a question for him. It's a question I think we've talked about before. I love this question. If Craig's Cards is watching or listening, you'll be interested. Let's bring him on. Leighton Sheldon, just collecting vintage breaks. Welcome to the show, buddy. How are you tonight? And please meet Tom.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. How are you today, Tom?
Doing great. Great to meet you, Leighton.
It's great meeting you as well.
Do have a question for you. So hopefully it's not too long-winded, but who or what should determine the cutoff date for vintage sports cards? Like, for example, should there be a specific cutoff date, or should cards be segmented by historical era or generational sports talent? I mean, I see people just throwing vintage all over the place.
That's a great question, Tom. And as Jeremy alluded to, I think we've discussed it, a little bit before, so I'll try to be, succinct. It really depends, Tom. But, for me personally, I like to use 1979 and that 1980 time period. It kind of just really works well across at least the major sports. But, I also would say it depends on, right, like when you grew up, when you collected. So for whatever it's worth, 1980s cards right now are several decades old. Sorry to make us all a little bit older in the room right now. But that's the reality of the situation. So who should decide? I'm not sure. Maybe the people who are also deciding on the YouTube Hall of Fame or, the Collecting Hall of Fame. But the joking aside, it's a great question, Tom. But that's my best take on it.
Great.
What do you think, Tom?
Yeah. So obviously, like, I'm asking the question because I'm looking for like parameters of a model to where I can cut it off. Yeah. I mean, I was having the conversation actually with my older brother today. We went to just a local show here, the Tampa Card Show today. And we kind of settled on an answer in our head where it's like, okay, maybe like 30 years is a good like break point. And then we kind of chuckled a little with each other too, because it's like, could we really imagine like Luca silver prisms be considered vintage.
Oh.
And then we're thinking like, well, what about like the 15-year-old kid that's collecting it, and then eventually they'll be, you know, in their 40s. It just makes us laugh a little, but hopefully we're lucky enough to see it become vintage.
Do you have any thought, like Tom? For me, to me, vintage goes up until the end of the 80s, and I know I'm probably in the minority here with that particular viewpoint, but that's when packs started changing from wax packs. No more gum, you know, upper deck and all the junk wax era kind of begins. But it might also depend on sport. I think there can be a bit of an argument made that, you know, maybe baseball vintage is up until Leighton's time, the end of the 80s. Maybe basketball, football, hockey. Basketball is a weird one because there wasn't much in the first half of the 80s at all. So it makes it easier to say vintage ends at the end of the 70s and starts in like 85 if we're ignoring star, which we shouldn't, but if we are, you know, I could see that be. But for your purposes, Tom, and building the model that you're thinking of right now, do you need 1 year where vintage ends, or can you work it so that it might be different by sport or a range of years even?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter. Like I can customize the models, but it's a really interesting conversation because I'm in the groupthink of that vintage versus modern needs to be segmented out and then be handled differently, right? Like the most, I think, where it's transparent, that cutoff is baseball. Because it's I'm building a propensity model for baseball players right now. In my football model, I have some retired players to try and predict active looking like retired, but just baseball cards, vintage, it's its own world. Like I cannot, like, I know it's not going to be predictive at all. You know, there's a lot of set completionists and, you know, baseball cards, people will say like transcends all sports card collecting. So that's why like the question's really interesting to me and why I think like my models should be and are at least adaptable. Like I don't think anyone envies me right now trying to tackle baseball.
I don't think so. Well, here, a couple of comments. Mark Santucci says some say 30 years. Well, that's 95. So I don't know that I'm there, but eventually we might be there. Bob Boozle says, let's call 80s and 90s the retro era. I mean, that's not a bad starting point. Maybe there's some discussion to be had from that, and we get somewhere. Bobby says vintage is when they still had gum in packs for consumers, and that's kind of where I look to. And also, what were the packs made of? Wax paper, and then they turned to foil and plastic and other things, and then they just come out in these fancy boxes and tins and all sorts of stuff. So Deep Value says, you know, Montana and older. So he's talking, that's a football answer, and perhaps that one makes sense for football. Leighton, any further comments on that? And then what question did you come with for our friend Tom?
Well, no further comments about that, but the question that I have for you, Tom, is based on your work so far with all of your models, and I realize you just asked me about vintage, so I'm not sure how much you've dove into, you know, the whole sector. But speaking of the vintage sector, in your humble opinion, based on your models, where do you think, or which sector of the vintage market do you think over the next 12 months and then over the next 5 years do you see the most upside in?
Yeah. So hockey for sure. And that's really based on looking where collectors are and what it's been doing just to modern hockey. I think eventually it's going to get to modern baseball levels, and then vintage baseball levels are going to pick up. And the reason why that is when I first started modeling hockey data, its curve and predictions was almost identical to baseball at the time. And baseball, for my predictions, was always like the solid go-to. And it was weird and exciting, too, to see like hockey get to there. And then speaking with hockey collectors, you know, very knowledgeable, you know, another thing I like to see, you know, baseball collectors, very knowledgeable. And they were also willing to help. as well. So that's kind of like the non-data factors I can throw into the models, kind of get an idea, a feel for the collector field to start playing with levers and play with parameters. But definitely hockey to me seems the most growth in vintage.
I have a question that, kind of involves both of you, because your data sources that you use, Tom, for your models must be coming from public sales. Yet a guy like Leighton has a bricks and mortar store, Just Collect. He's got, he sells online. He sells at card shows, along with many others watching and in the hobby, of course. Is your data compromised at all because it doesn't include that whole pool, all those transactions that likely don't outnumber what goes on online? Well, maybe they do, I'm not sure, but that are still a big part of the hobby and would likely, I think, maybe bring up your forecasts, because card shops can often get more for a card than any old, hobbyist can that doesn't have the overhead, let's say. What do you think of that? And from Leighton, I guess my question to Leighton on this is, like, what do you think, Leighton? Because a lot of the data out there that we were consuming other hobbyist analyses of them, including Tom's models, we're seeing graphs, we're seeing all these things happen, but they don't include a big segment of the hobby at this point in time. So Leighton, would you like to see them do that? I'd like to hear Leighton's answer first, because he's in it. He's out there on the front lines, every day. And then Tom, you're collecting the data. But Leighton, if you know about what Tom is doing, do you think that data from the non-online platforms should be included or would help?
I think it's a great question, Jeremy. I do think that the data should be included. I think that the data should help, where the data would help. The issue is going to be in the execution. So someone's going to, like Tom's building models, you'd have to build a model like what Mascot's doing, right? You literally would have to have a platform that you'd have a certified, group of members, meaning dealers, etc., that would input, whether it be they have one sale a week, several sales a week, and it may not be in terms of the total volume of transactions that great. But per your point, Jeremy, I think they're extremely influential. I think that they're a lot of money. And I've heard this term tossed around the industry, more so in gambling, but I don't gamble, more than ever before, a sharp. I do feel, and I'd be curious, Jeremy, what you think about this, and Tom, what you think about this. I do feel that maybe the folks who are very wealthy or well off financially that can purchase some of these substantial cards privately, I wonder if they like it like this, where the data isn't as complete. They can deduce that this particular card or cards is a buy or seems to be moving the direction of that, and they know that the actual whole data pie is incomplete. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah. So it is a huge gap, not only in my modeling work, but just in all the apps that currently track it. Beyond just private sales, also think of international sales. Probably the largest market and would probably swing most of the trends, most of the behavior. Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, and you could probably also make the point that it's currently another gap as well. It's just data governance, right? You're putting a lot of ownership on the shop owner or whatever the point of sale is to input that sale itself. They might not care about, the exact measurement precision of getting it in. Now, if say like a company like Mascot or somebody else really put like that was their focus and gathered the data from them, like made it easier, then we could get it at volumes to where it's usable.
Yeah.
Now, currently, like if it was just like, hey, your biggest private sale coming into play, like my models would identify that as an outlier and like try to smooth it out. Like that's always going to be an issue. But your point on, say like super collectors, we'll call them, right? And where the advantage is of like, hey, their sale not being included. We've seen what happens when they do public sales, right? Like I think of, Steve Aoki, for example. Like he will drive markets almost and he's adding to his PC. And people kind of forget that, there is some dollar exchange rate you have to do in your head where it's like, okay, his buying power, the super collector's buying power is not the equivalent of, say Tom making a budget
Right.
and buying that. So it's a really interesting question, and it's a huge gap out there.
And there's a lot of concerns about using that, like Leighton was saying, or you were saying too, I think, Tom. The integrity of that data would have to be intensely scrutinized because it could be fabricated if it's just coming from an individual and not backed up by an online marketplace, even though we know auctions go unpaid. But there's the private there's the private transaction pool of data that is missing from all analyses out there, most analyses out there, if not all of them, including yours. But there's one other bit of data or one other input to all this that we very rarely talk about in our hobby that would, I think, also increase the indices within the hobby, and that is the unknown max bid that was not bumped up against, right? Because if I'm willing to pay $1,000 for a card, but the second highest bidder is only willing to pay 600, and we're transacting on an incremental auction platform like an eBay, for example, well, I'm going to win that for 605. Yet I was willing to pay 1,000. So why is the value of that card based on the second, based on the guy who wants it the second most versus the guy who wants it the most? Because max bids are never disclosed publicly unless somebody screenshots and puts it out there, which I've been known to do a couple times just for fun. But what do you guys think of that? And I'm interested what the chat thinks too, because you might get a comp out there, $3,000 for whatever card, yet the high bidder was willing to go to 4 or 5 or whatever. That is unknown, but I think it's important, or maybe it isn't. What do you think, Leighton?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, Jeremy. Do I think it's important? Yes. Do I think that it's, and Tom, I feel like you're much more technical with data, so I'd love to hear your opinion. But I don't think it's a great indicator of value. And the reason being is because theoretically what you're saying is, and we'll just use something simple, 600, 605, that individual is willing to pay 1,500. The item really isn't worth 1,500 because there might not be anyone else in the world that's willing to pay more than 605 other than the individual. But kind of like what we see with a lot of data and reports, I'd love to see an asterisk next to that card. One person was willing to pay, this. But just because I don't want to forget, even though it's really about the last point, this is a shout out to Mascot. I know you've had Ezra on here before. I think, and my guess is they're probably moving in this direction, but it makes sense that the next kind of key pieces of data, Tom, that you're going to be able to obtain for your models will likely be coming from card show sales data that's now starting to happen transactionally because of Mascot, meaning they're capturing the card, you have the asking price. I mean, I saw Andy Maddox sold to Jerry Westbrook in 8.5. So I do agree with you, Jeremy. You have to check the data and make sure that it has integrity. But if folks are publishing their cards with prices and they are selling through Mascot's platform, utilized at card shows, I do think that might be a new piece of exciting data that we can start to track, see in Tom's models, maybe see on Card Ladder, VCP. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
So the value, I think, in what you're proposing, Jeremy, and I go beyond just like what the true value of what cards should be. But think of it, I was saying like, hey, it'd be great if we had like some collector sentiment stats. To me, that jumps in my head. That's a collector sentiment stat.
Totally.
Now, it might be seen as like this is synthetic data right now. But if you could capture those max bids and you track them over time, you get an idea of like the willingness to purchase. Not sure if you really would incorporate that into the value of like an individual card, but if you're just trying to get like sentiment of the hobby as a whole, I'm sure if you looked at peak pandemic versus now, it'd be a very like interesting story. Like if you're looking like the distribution and how many people are now like, okay, because we're having conversations, I think, in our head or with our friends, with collectors, where it's like, everybody's kind of, shifted what they're willing to spend. Larger cards have come down in price. Some are more attainable. Like I think what you're proposing, we capture would actually quantify that thought. So I want that data, Jeremy, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some great comments coming through here. I'm going to try to, there's a ton of comments, so I'm going to try and sort through them really quickly. So John, the basketball guard guy, says the value is based on the second most because the guy who won it at the most already got it, unless you are in the market for Duplus. I would argue that the second highest is the market. And that makes a lot of sense because I or the highest bidder might have been willing to pay more, but you just didn't have to. So maybe that isn't the value. But then, another comment came in here from Linda's First, says, great point on the max bid, because the old saying is a card is worth what someone is willing to pay for it. Well, if I was willing to pay 1,000, but the second highest bidder was only willing to pay 600, I got it for 605. I feel like I got $395 of savings. I feel like I'm ahead of the game already at that point. And the LGC says max bids would be known with Dutch auctions. And to John's comment, basketball card guy's comment here, actually this one over here, one of my responses just in the court in for the sake of discussion would be, wrong comment from John. This one here, one of my responses to this would be that, yes, I was willing to pay more than the other person was, but if we were doing a blind auction, let's say the hobby was run on blind auction, just put in your highest bid. Well, I'm coming in at 1,000 and bidder number 2 is coming in at 600. I'm not paying 605. In that case, I'm paying 1,000. We don't have that. eBay as the biggest platform in our hobby does not run that way, but that is a way that some things are sold sometimes. And if that was the case, then the highest bidder, the person who's willing to pay the most, just like Linda's First said, is now the one who determines what that card is worth on that day, on that platform, sort of thing. So I don't know that there's a right answer to this, guys. I just don't think there is a right answer. I think this is something that for you, Tom, and the way you run your models and all that, it's almost like you almost need a whole bunch of like, I'm not telling you what to do here, but disclaimers or, things to consider, that kind of thing, just to paint the full picture so people know, because what we see out there as far as data and graphs go, it's not complete information. It doesn't paint the whole picture. And for that reason, it can be somewhat misleading. But with all that said, it might be the best we have, and it might be the best we can possibly have. Leighton, you're nodding. Give us a couple thoughts, and we'll go to Tom, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to, let's say like some of the earlier Beckett's, and there'd always be notes at the top of the set describing like a sale or two, or maybe even sentiment. And so, I mean, Tom, like I said, it seems as though you have much more experience in this area than anyone probably either watching the show tonight, now, or in the future. But I think you're suggesting the same thing just a few minutes ago. I think that all the data is great. I think that it would be wonderful if mascots listening, if they can import completed card show sales data, because I could see how excited you were, Tom. And candidly, as someone who does this professionally, and I'm also a collector, I think that's a big win all around. So those are my closing thoughts on that.
How about you, Tom? Anything to add in?
I mean, just think about like as a data professional how exciting this conversation is, and how we're at this point in the hobby where we're avidly, passionately discussing data we should be getting, true value. Like, it's exciting for me. I know it's probably annoying to others where it's like, oh my goodness, what happened to just, collecting what we love? But there's tools out there. There's people who are applying, their career, their life passions to it. And it's just, let's get creative. Let's have the arguments. What's true value? Like, this is great.
It's like the vintage question. I don't think there's a right answer. It's just,
Yeah.
I'm with you, Leighton.
There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's, man.
Yeah.
That's just it. So.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap up the Leighton Sheldon vintage spotlight segment. Leighton, thanks for jumping on here. Guys, follow Leighton on Instagram, Leighton_Sheldon and just_collect. And of course, his podcast, Trading Card Therapy. Leighton, thanks for joining. Anything you'd like to announce before you roll off?
Two things. So one, I apologize, but I'm not going to be able to make next week's show, so I'll miss everyone. But of course, I'll be back the week after. But closing on a higher note, this is very exciting, Jeremy. I will be at the April Toronto show. Hopefully, I'll be there with you on Thursday night at your tribal council meeting. If I get the invite, and I'll be there Thursday and Friday, flying out Saturday morning. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, that's great. Well, and I'm going to just let everybody know the Toronto Expo is April 25th to 28th or 26th to 29th, whatever it is. It's the Wednesday to the Sunday or the Thursday to the Sunday. And it's Thursday to Sunday. Thursday night, I organize an event at a Jack Astor's. We get their whole bar. Well, we get their whole room. It's a big room, seats about 100. And it's a nice kind of just networking, meet people, come have a meal, have a few drinks after the show ends on the Thursday night, and everybody is invited. There is capacity, so you got to get there early enough to get in. But we've been kind of filling up for the last few versions of it, but we've been doing this for 15 years, and this will be another one. It's already booked to go, so I'll be putting that on Instagram. We'll be talking about it at the Expo Thursday night, Jack Astor's, for what I just call like a nice networking Expo event. Thanks for reminding me, Leighton. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for joining. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Sounds great. It was nice meeting you, Tom.
Great meeting you.
All right, Tom. Let's keep on going here. We got so many great comments here from the chat. So let's just go to comments. I've got my notes. I'm going to just kind of ignore them for now. And we're going to go to some comments that have come in. We're going to go back to the vintage conversation. We're going to kind of go back in time a little bit here. 86 says, I think with new vintage, I think the new vintage goalpost has moved to 1989. Kids today consider 90s to be vintage. So there's some further comment on that. Here's a great question from the Currency Project. Tom, he says, what have you found to be the most surprising bit of data about the hobby that you've come across since you started?
Yeah, what's always been surprising to me is how different, not going to call them markets, but more categories are elastic to different data that'll come in. Like basketball's been like very sensitive to player performance. And I think it really starts talking about like the collecting segments out there. Football, pretty solid, but still goes against like the narrative you'll usually hear about like, like prospecting, the next Brady, the next Mahomes, but like the data is what I always imagined it would be. It's like, you should probably just stick to the GOATs,
Yeah. And which ties into another comment that came through here, which I'm going to try to find here really. There it is. Dan's Vintage says, isn't it true that collecting to build your PC based on what you love and let the chips fall as they may financially? So it's more that collector focused comment here. And listen, I think that's the history of the hobby was built on collecting in the first place. It's not just about that anymore. Like we have to, all of us, longtime collectors, we just have to like be aware of what the reality is today. And for better or for worse, like it or not, it's just what it is. And there's a lot of people who are in this for the money. They are into cards just for money. And some of them are very vocal about it now. And there's room for that. I think there's room for it. I mean, there's room for that for me. I'm allowing, for my experience, I'm okay with there being room for that. Some people hate it. And I understand that too. We're all entitled to how we want this hobby to be. But at the end of the day, no one person's going to be able to control what the hobby is. So either embrace it or complain about it, or just adapt and live within it. This isn't this. I'm not saying this at Dan right now. I'm just saying it at the whole collecting versus investing kind of battle that we've had in this hobby now for quite some time. But again, he says, let the chips fall as they may financially. I don't know. If I'm collecting a card and I need to spend, again, significant money on that card, I'm personally, I'll admit it, I'm going to be concerned about what its future value is going to be, because that money could have gone to bettering my family's life, So that's where I fall. How about you, Tom? Anything to say about that?
Yeah, I always think about the first thing a family member who doesn't collect, when they see like my office setup, like in the back, like the first thing they always ask is like, "Ooh, how much is all this worth?"
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like they know like it's my hobby. It's, it's collecting, but it's always like, you can't help it, because they know that you didn't just find this stuff, you put a financial investment into it, and there's that opportunity cost. You
Right.
could have gone on a vacation.
That's right. Right. The other thing to consider is that, you can go out there and get some sort of money market type of investment, put some money in a high interest savings account and get 5% or so. If it depends depends who your financial advisor is, but you can get 5% right now on some money, even a bit more. By putting money into cardboard instead. And if you don't care about the value of your cardboard, if you just write it off as an expense on your P&L instead of putting it as an asset on your balance sheet, well, then that's fine. But the opportunity cost that Tom's speaking of is that, well, you either could have done something else with it for whatever, for your family or whatever, or you could have invested it. And now it's costing you 5% to keep those cards, or to buy the cost of those cards. Now is actually the cost of the card plus the 5% you could have got. Now, this is not very fun to talk about when it comes to a hobby. If I thought about if that's how I thought all the time, I probably wouldn't be as passionate about collecting cards as I have been for the past 40 something years now. So I'm not advising anyone to think like that, but maybe some people who've come to the hobby recently with dollar signs in their eyes, that is how they're thinking, because it's just the reality of the situation that if you're taking $5,000, putting into a card, you're now costing yourself 5% on $5,000 a year. Compounding, which is even a little bit more. A couple of random comments. Currency Project says, I'd say vintage is pre-insert and pre-parallels. That does tie into my thoughts, so I like that one. And I know there were inserts in the 60s and 70s too. I don't think those were the ones that we're talking about. The professor says, following up on my question, all the transactions could be easily captured with more use of web crawlers, at least card shop list or wholesale prices. Yeah, but I think the problem with list and wholesale prices is that, well, first of all, wholesale is wholesale, so that's a different category. We're not talking about wax here. At least in my mind, we're not talking about wax, Tom. We're talking about the single card, not the unopened product. And so, you can ask whatever you want on any website for anything. I don't think that's good data personally. Mr. LAGN said, it sounds like Card Ladder talking about the private transaction data. And I think Card Ladder is poised to be the best platform to offer this solution. I think there's no one else doing it, because they will take private transaction data, but it's got to be so tough on them to be able to vet it. And I know they have a process and they've got their list, they've got their criteria, which is wonderful that they have a framework. Still got to be tough. And unfortunately, I just don't think they're getting, and I don't know for sure. So correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from Card Ladder, but I doubt that they're getting enough of that data to make it indicative of the overall private transaction world. Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, you also open yourself up to like data liability, tech debt, just cleaning it up, right? The effort to put in. Now, there is at least another app that I know of, who Get Collector, I think it's called. They also do private sales. They handle it in a different way. They also allow the user to, and this is going to be like everyone close their ears, they let the user overwrite the market value
Hmm.
if they don't agree with like what the app is tracking.
Hmm.
What could go wrong, right?
Right. Right. All right, we'll go through some more. Lots of stuff in the chat tonight, you guys. Basketball card guy John says, I love nerding out on Tom's data. The more of this that becomes available, the more informed we can all be. It's definitely one thing to consider, right? Tom, I think I hope you'd agree with me that you would. I hope you wouldn't say to people, my data is all you need. I mean, you need to have your own insights, your own thoughts and opinions and preferences, of course, but it is definitely one more source of information if you want it to be to help you make some decisions. If you are not just collecting based on pure passion and your favorite player, that's all you're doing, you don't care what anyone else thinks. So you don't care about charts or reports. You're just collecting for fun, and all the power to you. Anything on that, Tom?
Yeah. I mean, my goal is to empower collectors, right? If you'll see on my website, I made a shift to more of not really a self-service, but it has that functionality. So any of the models, you can export the source data yourself, do it in whatever, whether it be Excel or import it into one of the statistical softwares I mentioned earlier, and really analyze and, come to your own insights. I'm definitely a lever that, you can use my career experience, use my analysis, but it's still like you don't need it. Right? Like it's not mutually exclusive with buying a pack from a card shop.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob Boothel wants to know, can Tom confirm that he's not a time traveler masquerading as data? And I say data kind of interchangeably. Colin Murray, what's going on? Mark Santucci, yes, I will be having a Tim Hortons coffee tomorrow morning at the airport. Definitely. Michael says, whenever a family member sees my card collection and asks what it's worth, I always tell them less than what I have invested in money and time, but more in satisfaction and love. That's pretty cool. I love that answer, Michael. Colin tells us that the 1979 O-Pee-Chee case selling tonight on Heritage Auctions is at 2.3 million, still going. Colin, if you wouldn't mind, keep us posted on what's happening there. Terry Fortune says 2.76 million USD and rising. So it looks like there are bids coming in on that 79 O-Pee-Chee case with about 27.2 Wayne Gretzky rookies contained inside. Bobby Burrell says opportunity is actually more important than price. I think what he's saying there is if we're talking about financial results, ROI, it's, as a lot of people say in a lot of different industries, the money is made on the buy, not so much on the sell. I think that might be what he's saying here. I'm not exactly sure, but you were nodding in agreement. Tom, what were you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, that's usually a voiceover I give whenever I go through the results of any of the forecasting, right? It's all about when you came in on the buy. Like a model could be showing you that, hey, this is going to be down 56%. Well, it's down from that starting point. But if you came in on a dip when the opportunity was there, you're not down that percentage.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that. The professor says, from a buyer's perspective, having wholesale pricing can be valuable, especially if the same card and same grade is several $100s less expensive at a different online analysis. Simply speaking, I think what the professor is getting at is arbitrage, and there have been people playing the multi-platform arbitrage game in this hobby for years. It doesn't only go by platform; it goes by regions as well, right? Buy New York Knicks cheap in Miami and take them back up and sell them in New York. I mean, people have been doing that, and that's what one of the roles of like the mobile flipper in our hobby, right? They're doing the card show circuit. They're buying cards in California and selling them in Toronto or buying them where, at any show, anywhere, buying them in Dallas, selling them at Burbank, vice versa. And there's all sorts of opportunities for arbitrage. If you have the wherewithal to monitor all these sites, you're going to be able to make a bit of money in simple arbitrage, right? Does that come into play in your model, in your predictive models at all, Tom? Like just regional premiums and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So that comes into play through the Google Trends, right? I can see the different search and interest by region. I definitely for sure see it in action. Like I saw it in action today at the Tampa Bay show. So Yankees have spring training in Tampa. Half of their unit is here. I'm actually going to the Yankees Blue Jays tomorrow. But Yankees, what I'm getting by that, sell regionally well here in Tampa because of the spring training team. It's like another home base for them. But then there were cards that we were able to pick up that just regionally don't do well in this area, or just dealers just know they can't move it, so they have it at a lower price. And that's part of the joys of sports collecting. And it's something that has to be an input in models. So otherwise they're not usable.
Or relevant and or just less relevant, I suppose, too. Yeah. Monkey Mooney says, thinking about the opportunity cost for any purchase or activity is a prudent move. Although it could drive you crazy that you might it just might make you not able to move. You might make you frozen because you're going to be scared to spend anything because I can make more money on it elsewhere. And there goes the joy of life. There's some chat here I saw between Zach and John, the basketball card guy, just about the enjoyment of making those emotional purchases. Like that's what, if there's no emotion in a purchase, I've made a few card purchases because I thought, this is a card that I want to invest in. I don't get any enjoyment out of those cards. And then I end up just selling them sometimes for a loss because I was wrong, but my personal collection is, I got to say it's, if I've got 2,000 cards in my PC, I think 1,998 of them are all emotional purchases because, I just love the cards. And I think a lot of you guys watching do as well. Speaking of John, what I need is breakfast. Every time I see Tom's post, I've never desired pancakes covered in syrup so much in my lifetime. John, you're probably triggering it for a lot of us. Dan, the card man, has joined us. What's going on, Dan? Bobby says, from a collector's perspective, I meant the first opportunity to buy something will always outweigh the price you will pay. The money is always there, but opportunity is not. Yeah, and he's talking about rare items, the kind of items that you buy them when you see them. Let me ask you this then, to bring it back to what you do, Tom. Are your predictive models mostly dealing with the commodity type cards? Are they dealing with player indices, or do they take into account that item that might only show up once a year, if that?
Yeah, so currently it's just the indices, those commodity cards. I do have an outstanding request. So we didn't plan this, but I did get a recent request from a high-end collector to see what I could develop for that type of market. So where I'm a little apprehensive about it is because, and you've alluded to it, is where predictive models work really well for the generalist, right? It's not going to tell you that much or be useful for like when you get into specifics. Now, I think there's opportunity if you take more of like the financial pro forma output, where it's like, okay, you have a model built in, but then you let user input drive it, right? Because when it comes to that rarity, that scarcity, those cards, the collector's always going to be smarter than any model that's produced.
Definitely. Yeah. That makes good sense to me. Okay. Here's a question that I don't know if I'll understand the answer. I'm not going to speak for the chat, but let's put up again. The professor is an AI professional. You are a data analyst. So we'll ask a high level question. How does the variability fit in a model, if at all? I don't even understand the question completely. So please take it from here.
Yeah. So it comes into play a lot. And what I mean by that is, so you'll see on my site, delivered in one analysis, it'll cover 8 different categories, but they're very different, very variable. And I am actually creating 8 different models behind the scene. But to the user, it's like, oh, Tom updated it this month. And so what I mean by that is I have to fine tune parameters, make sure I'm analyzing what's coming in, test and train. But, there are different fit statistics behind the scenes that I'm able to play with that variability. But just be assured, you might have to do some digging in my site to go to the earlier ones, because at first, like, I was just doing this for myself as the collector, and it was very technical, very specific. But it's all there about what variability I try to control for.
God, okay, so listen, the professor has now outdone himself with an even higher level question, which I'm going to bring up. Before I do, a little sort of comedic interlude here. Al Terwell says, when Hollywood makes Moneyball 2, the pancake analytics, will Tom's role be played by Brad Pitt or Jonah Hill? I'm going to go with Jonah Hill here, Tom. No offense, Brad Pitt's a handsome guy, but Jonah Hill's looking pretty good lately. He's gotten himself in shape. I'm going to go with Jonah Hill. All right, let's go to the professor's high-level question here. Technical question for Tom. He says, propensity modeling is a very broad term. Hey, learn something every day. Is Tom thinking of adding a layer of machine learning or probabilistic theory using Bayes' theorem? Now, Tom, if this answer is going to cause people to click off this show, please give us your quickest answer. If the answer is really interesting, explain the question and please then give us your answer.
Yeah. So really quick, propensity, where it gets confused and very broad and used everywhere, is because you just think of the definition in, language, layman's term, propensity as like likelihood of something. Now, my scores on the website is the latter of this. So it's the Bayes' theory, it's probabilities, to put it simple. So whenever you see a score, it's predicting likelihood. It's not a machine learning model behind the scenes.
Okay, thank you for that, Professor. I hope that is set. He says, "Thank you, Tom. I will bring out the shovels and start digging tomorrow." And if I know the professor at all, I think he will likely be doing that. He is he is thirsty for information. I'll put it that way. He did clarify, how does grading variability play into the modeling? If you can speak to the grading variability a little bit, please.
Yeah. So I do have a couple of analysis where I deep dive into grading. The indexes, like when I spot check them, there is different grading variability. So hopefully, the models are smoothing it out and controls for that amongst other noise. I know the indexes that I personally built myself with the card ladder team, like I solved through it through RFM segmentation and making sure we got a good mix of that variability. Can't speak so much for ones that I didn't develop, though. But 100% a factor. Yeah.
All right, there you go. Vintage card collector lets us know the O-Pee-Chee 79 hockey case is now 3.12 million USD. I will add in for the Canadian contingent. That is a lot of money. We're now over 4 million Canadian. Good luck to the winner of that. That is going to be pretty cool. Mike Petty says, I need to add Bayes' theorem to my pancake. Bob Ouzel's wife watches Basketball Wives. She can help with a baby mama patch for your variability index. You guys are talking just way above my level tonight. Dan Fincher says, I can assure you that my family is doing fine and my card purchases are not affecting their quality of life. Dan, that is an amazing position to be in life. Congratulations to you on your success. Okay, Tom, I'm going to go back to my notes for a second because I saw something that I want to make sure that we did talk about. You had said to me the other day that one of the scariest things out there is being good at enough at something, but not good enough to realize that you're wrong. What did you mean by that? I found that interesting. I want to make sure I understood it and share it with the audience.
Yeah. So, so you can be educated, build models for a living. There's a lot of open source data out there, a lot of research you can do. You can even grab code, copy and paste, grab the software, scrape the data. Okay, code will run without errors, right? You will get an output. You'll get fit statistics. If you don't know that your model's incorrect, you're going to run with that incorrect data. Or if you don't know you're not covering for all those collector confounding factors, like don't try to predict average price sold of a card, and you throw in total sales and total transactions. Like by definition, that's how you calculate it, average price. And then also just as a collector, like when you want to if you do the investment side, like there's one clear example of where it was like knowing enough to be dangerous, but not knowing that you were wrong. And it comes to my mind, the infamous Kyler Murray versus Will Greer. So that talking point came from a propensity model, not built by me, but it was built by 5830, that website through ESPN, and it was predicting NFL success by yards per attempt. Now, the football fan would realize that that's not an indicator of winning a Super Bowl, let alone like being valuable in trading cards. But you're looking at a table and the two players are right next to each other. So it's easy to make that, oh, I should go for the guy who's almost like the big name. But it's just faulty logic. But you didn't know you were wrong.
Right. And it seems to me like, that is symbolic of what, of just a lot of the current culture today, where we see a lot of claims being made. We see a lot of complaints. I'll speak about it within the hobby. We see a lot of complaints about certain things in the hobby without the people making the claim really understanding the whole landscape of the situation and ignoring certain things. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at. And to me, that's just the world today. So I'm not too surprised by it. Bob Ouzel, I feel like a hillbilly that walked into a cocktail reception. Where's the moon? Bob, I think, yeah, join the club, Bob. Definitely. The professor responds as Tom's use of the Bayes theorem is commendable. Thomas Bayes was an English statistician, philosopher, and Presbyterian minister, and his theorem was discovered after he passed away in 1761. The professor, he's thirsty for knowledge, but he loves to share it as well. We've talked a lot about what you do, but I still feel like I don't know that we've gotten the message across clearly to the audience. So if someone who hasn't yet leaves this show tonight that wasn't already checking out your models, your predictive reports, what are they going to find on your website? And what are they going to find in the future that you're working on? Are they going to be able to go on to the Pancake Analytics website and get some ideas as to where the future of the sports card hobby value-wise is going to go?
Yeah. So use my website. You're going to find searchable tools for collectors. Interactive. It's going to have predictions 3 months out for value of cards. You're going to have probabilities, assumptions, all based in data. I try to cover as many categories as I can. Even if I don't collect in it, remove all biases. And there's plenty of voiceover and write-ups. You're not just going to be looking at a table or a graph. There's going to be a human behind it. Moving forward, there's a lot of questions I just want to see if we can solve with data, or at least get a better understanding. It's all about learning, growing. One thing that's in everyone's head, I'm sure, is, do pop counts matter? Right now, my hypothesis is kind of weird. Yes and no. It probably some cards out there that it doesn't matter for different genres. And, let's build some models and prove it out. Another great thing, and I collaborate with other collectors with same financial mindsets, analytics mindsets. AIHH Sports, he is finance. Him and I talk all the time and figuring out like, okay, can we test some of what he puts out there? Different, index changes, different financial factors. There's models we can build, and it just takes a community to do it. So that's where it's earlier we were talking about, it's not Tom's way or the highway. Let's put biases aside and just build for collectors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's a great mindset to apply to what you're doing. Now, here's another mindset I want to ask if you apply to it, and that is accountability. If you put out a predictive model that tells you and your readers what the prediction is going to be 12, 24 months, 60 months down the road, do you ever go back and see just how accurate your models were? And then do you take that result to tweak your ongoing future models as well?
Yeah, great question. So I hold myself highly accountable. I've already done it once, and I plan to do it annually. So I do it in a physical year-to-date report. Covers like a snapshot of all the analysis, all the questions we solved for. And then it also evaluates the accuracy of my forecasts. So the first run of it, my forecast had an error rate of 12%. That is good news statistics-wise. Good models are considered 20% and lower. Then 10% gets to excellent. So we were at about 12%, which is better than good, not quite excellent. And then I deep dive into each category that proved the model right, proved it wrong. In this case, it was a TCG category that made it, rain cats and dogs. Everything's up and down. And then I break down what were the drivers, why did it do that, and then solutions around how to improve the models moving forward. So a lot of it is, these models give you upper, lower, and a forecast. This certain category, I stick to lower now until proven wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important to check your work. Don't just put it out there and forget about it and hope for the best next time. You can probably learn the most from your past versions than you can from maybe most other things as you try to improve your accuracy, right? I think that's then add more layers and more assumptions and more variables into your models. I want to say hi to Joe Perot checking in late. Might need some remedial help with these. I don't know how you say it. Do you know how to say that word? Erudity? I don't know. That word, reckonings, good stuff, guys. Joe and the vocabulary. Vintage card collector. We're all enjoying the content and thoroughly confused at the same time. Right. Fellow Fireball, does Tom use GIS? It is great for metadata models and reports. Do you use GIS, Tom?
No, I do not. But I will 100% research and consider it now.
Mike Petty, funny comment. I'm going to need some glue for all these models I have to build, right? Very nice. Terry Fortune lets me know that the Battle of Alberta is heating up. 3-2 for my Calgary Flames, middle of the second period. But still, a lot of game to go. The professor, has Tom thought about applying the Bayes theorem to the Pareto principle? Are you familiar with the Pareto principle, Tom?
Yes. So you can do it. So I like having, and this is just going to be for me and the professor here, but have Bayes feed into the Pareto. So Pareto is you make an assumption. it's like, yeah, I'm going to mispronounce it, but
Say
hopefully
however
I
you want.
get the actual meaning right, and he'll give
Pharaoh,
me
I
a
love it.
thumbs up. But it's 80-20 assumptions, so you can have Bayes theory feed into it to reassure or change your ratio a little bit on it.
Well, Bob Boozle says it. I think he says it very succinctly. Connecting these principles will make the earth explode. Can't really disagree with that observation right there. Okay, let's go to some other topics now. The first one I want to ask you about, and we'll keep attention to the chat, everybody, your comments if there's anything coming back. But I wanted to switch gears. I asked Tom the other day, what are a few other hobby issues that are on your mind? And one of them that he mentioned was the single licensee era. And your thoughts on that, Tom, where we're at today, and do you think we have? It's going to sound like a silly question. I'm just going to ask it to get the conversation started. Do you think we have enough competition in the sports card hobby right now?
I don't think so. When you go down based off of licensees and there's definitely enough manufacturers. But what I'm concerned about is when it's single licensees and everyone stays in their own lane, you don't have competition, you're not driving creativity. And you kind of see it I guess the sentiment, at least mine, is that a lot of sets are getting stale. Parallels are getting stale. You're starting to get all that manufactured scarcity. And, the hits is all based on numbers. If you look at some of the stuff, and I'll say Upper Deck goes to their greatest hits all the time, because it's the card they have to play at this point. You see a lot of great international sets out there, right? And then you're just like, oh man, it would be great if, everyone would share those licenses here too. It's just, you want options as a collector. You don't think about just letting one control it. You're a collector. You're not a business. I just am worried about, lack of creativity, and we're just getting repetitive, and it's same old, and we're dealing with contracts, and it's not a good win in my eyes for collecting.
And listen, I'll never say that competition isn't good. I'm not as harsh or critical of Upper Deck, for example, as some people are. That's fine. I think they put out a nice product. I like the cards. But you mentioned that people like options, and then the immediate thought that came to my mind was we have more options now than we've ever had. Really, they're just all made by the same card company by sport.
Yeah.
We don't have options for different card companies, but basketball, I don't know, you've probably got 30, 40 different products. Hockey, about the same. Baseball, football, we've got tons of products coming out every year. There are some other unlicensed options out there as well, Leaf, Wildcard, etc., that do a nice job in the unlicensed world as well. So I think we do have options, but I hear you. Do you think that we'd be in a much different place today right now in the hobby if we never had the single licensee regime that we're in?
I think we would, and it's kind of hard to tell if it would actually be for the better, right? I could see the argument for now you're flooding it with everything, and where do I even start? It's already kind of hard when you're getting into the hobby and just the optionality of it. But I just want to see these manufacturers compete. Get creative for me. But this is me being selfish and biased. Not biased with data, biased with what I like.
Right. And listen, as you should be, because you and me and everyone else watching, we are all putting our money into these items, into these cards, so we can own them. All we can really do is own them. There's not much more utility from a card besides that great feeling you get when you buy it, when you receive it, and all that. They don't do anything that we need as humans to survive except bring us joy. And I don't want to undervalue that. I see great value in that myself. That's why I've been doing this my my whole life, along with many of the rest of you. Laura says the O-Pee-Chee auction down to the last 15 minutes. Please keep us posted on the final price of that. Skeppy has a question for you, Tom. What error rate would you say your analysis was a fail? Meaning, what standard do you put yourself at to remain valuable to the market?
Yep. So each forecast, I try to strive for 10% or lower error rate. There has been one case I went to market with higher than that, but I don't like to call it production unless it's less than 10%. And it's just because I knew for a fact market manipulation was happening. And I wanted to focus on future accuracy as opposed to like current accuracy when I was testing. And that one was, and everybody will probably agree and shake their heads. Yes, Marvel cards. I needed to kick out a huge chunk. And the error rate was much higher than 10%, but long term, it ended up being right. It was gut feeling there. But yeah, usually I keep it to less than 10%.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Nice answer on that for Skeppy. Another topic that I wanted to talk to you about, and one that you found interesting currently, is you have some thoughts around barriers to collecting. So please speak to that and let everybody understand what you're thinking.
Yeah, when I think of like barriers to collecting, it's like I remember how, when I got into it, it was like family member brought me in with that pack. There's now, it gets hard to collect as a casual just starting without having like so much knowledge already. Like you and I, Jeremy, we know like we put in some research, we got tons of online tools, like we'll find what we want. But just imagine, somebody going into a card shop and the card shop, 80 some odd % of their sales are on Whatnot or online. So they're not focused on somebody who just walked into their own store. Other barriers, I like to think, and it might not really be considered a barrier, but like if you get into such a niche and now you have to start focusing more on like international cards, which might have a higher cost and might price you out a certain card. So it's not necessarily a barrier to collecting it, but it's just another hoop to jump over per se. That's what keeps me up at night.
You also mentioned something to me about the life cycle of a collector. What are you thinking about when you say that?
Yeah, it's a life cycle of a collector, and that really comes from the day job. We always talk about like life cycle of consumers, card holders, and you kind of seen it happen like in real time, much quicker happening during the pandemic, right? The boom of cards, where it's like people get excited about this. Ooh, I can do cards for a living, or ooh, I'm going to start make money in the hobby I love. Then all of a sudden you become like hardcore collectors and your like behavior is shifting. I think it drives into my models a lot. And that's why the models are so predictive, because people are coming in their life cycles at different times. And as a collector, I hope that like eventually the data would show like we're collecting smarter as a group. But it's just people are going through different life cycles. So it's like always predicting the same. And with the accuracy, it's like I want to be surprised. No. But it's just life cycle journeys.
How do goats fit into all this for you?
Yeah, for goats, that is definitely, I would think it's a life cycle. Like eventually, like you could start off like, oh, I'm prospecting. And then you start realizing like, oh, I should have put more money into proven talent, generational talents, more cards that I can move. And then you start realizing, you know what? I want to keep this. I want to have the Gretzky on the wall. Like that is something cool. That's like a conversational piece.
Yeah, put it on the wall.
Yeah.
There, still getting used to that. Professor wants to know, is there a minimum number of data points that Tom needs in moving forward with a model? Oh, this is some advanced stuff. Keep this answer quick, please, Tom.
Yeah. So for forecasting, I like to keep it to 24 data points, and I aggregate it up. So I'm not talking like I'm taking like 24 days. Like it'll be either weeks, months, but 24 is where I can see like at least 2 seasonal periods for whichever one I'm modeling for.
There you go, Professor. Bob Boozle, always the great questions and comments. Would Tom voluntarily put on an Elon Musk Neuralink brain chip in his head to 10x his processing power? It's actually a pretty legitimate question tonight, Tom. You're the only person I'd be comfortable asking this to without a smirk on my face. No smirk. Would you do it?
If I could guarantee my body could handle it. I mean, I'm scared, like, if anyone was to 10x, what it would do. We're just not ready. The shell's not ready.
Let's go on to Jeff DeErico. Love this question. He says, would love to see what your collection / investments look like with all the analytics. That's a great question. How has your, I'm going to use an investment term, portfolio performed? And let me ask you this too, because you are taking such a financial look at the hobby, do you consider your collection to be a PC collection? Do you consider it to be an investment portfolio or a bit of a hybrid? And then to his question, yeah, how has it been doing?
Yeah, it's for sure a hybrid. It's mostly sealed. Like if you look at see in the background, my cases, they're mostly sealed cards. I have a lot of vintage singles as well. And it's what, like, you know, the models will tell me, but it's also stuff I enjoy. Like the sealed, when I was buying it up, was, you know, PC, what I felt was cool. A lot of it was lining up with moments, whether it be in sports, where it's like, ooh, I knew like this moment is captured on a card. Let me get that. That'll be cool. Piece eventually. Some of them have picked up sooner, some of them not. When it comes to non-sports, I know like a lot of like first appearances and cool items like that too. But it's hard to make it an investment. Like you want to rip them, you want to open them.
yeah. But what are you collecting? Future moments in collecting, or the unopened boxes themselves? But hey, the answer to that is whatever the heck you want it to be. You know, you don't have to answer to me. You can do whatever you want with your collection. But I do, you know, appreciate Jeff's asking and just getting an idea for what your collection does look like. Hobby Champ says, does the unpredictable nature of online influence disrupt the ability to properly analyze hobby data? I got to say, I love this question. By the way, Hobby Champs, thanks for asking it. Hadn't thought of this one. Can you address this, Tom?
Yes. You can even refer to an article I did on my site, a deep dive into Steve Aoki's influence. Very unpredictable in how he affects markets. That model can be applied to any social influence. But earlier I also mentioned I'm really incorporating those Google Trends now as well. So I'm trying to get as much of quantified of the unquantifiable. Like I've used scrape Twitter before for Comic-Con pieces that I do. So I think that's also a viable option. You know, you can make the unpredictable nature a little bit more predictable.
Dan's Vintage says a sealed collection is a joyless collection. I'm not sure how a box can speak to a collector like a Lou Gehrig Gaudi card. So I want to respond to that a little bit, Tom, because I don't like Dan. I appreciate that that's your approach and you would get no joy from it, but others do. I know for a fact others do, myself included, when it comes to my unopened pack of O-Pee-Chee run. Why? Because I remember going to the store and seeing those packs and opening them up many, many times. And I've got all those cards. I've had all those cards. It's that pack brings me joy. Seeing that pack brings me joy. If you are a collector of unopened product, Tom, and you are buying what you used to buy 10, 20, 30 years ago and displaying it because that takes you back, that is nostalgia. Nostalgia comes in many forms, not only cards out of the pack. Nostalgia comes in other forms as well. Some people collect empty boxes of like the empty box doesn't even have the cards inside. I don't think that's joyless. I can respect that for Dan, to you it's joyless, but to project that out generally to the whole hobby, I got to push back on that, Dan. I think you're out of line on that particular comment, but I do respect that to you, for you, you wouldn't get joy from it. But I don't think you can fairly project that upon everybody else. You collect some unopened. Would you like to respond at all or share some thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, I think there's some information I should disclose that would make Dan a little happier, hopefully. So everything that I have sealed, like I buy 2, and I have opened 1. So I always open 1, keep 1 sealed. So I'm getting like that joy as well. But there are some boxes where, like, man, the box art is great. Pack art is great as well, sealed packs. Now, what it will tend to do for me, and where it kind of gets like single collecting, like there are some blasters retail that I consider buying because Aaron Rodgers is in a Jets jersey on the box. Right. And like that might have like no value at all. But to me, it's like almost the equivalent of like, oh, here's his first Jets jersey card.
It's funny you say that. I used to if I were to open a box, I would actually save the box. And then, how the way boxes open, sometimes they're like punch out die cut.
Yeah, you do like the display.
Yeah. I was going as far as cutting out the player from the box and putting them in an oversized top loader. And then literally only about 2 weeks ago, as I've recently moved, I've been going through all my crap, and my good stuff too, but I've been going through all the stuff. It's like, do I really need this? And then the thought goes into my mind, will this ever be worth anything? I'm like, you know what, even if it is, I don't care. I don't need it. I'm going to get rid of it and just like free myself of some of these things. But I was going as far as cutting the player's silhouette out of the cardboard display box. Never mind the whole box of the cards inside. It was just that. But hey, we're collectors. We want more representations of these things that we love. In many cases, some of us do. I won't say most. I won't project that way. Many of us do, I think. But yeah, interesting stuff. Fun little chat. Dan, thanks for triggering that one off. Vintage Card lets us know strong prices for vintage high-end wax boxes on Heritage tonight. Bobby Burrell says propaganda is alive and well in the hobby. And the professor, who dipped off of YouTube, went to watch us on X, formerly Twitter, says we had 40 viewers on Twitter. Thanks for letting us know that, Professor. Michael says that it's the box, the unopened case of O-Peach is now 2.9 million into extended bidding time. Filmington is in the house. He says, with me, I don't get quite the same dopamine hit from sealed wax, but it's a more subtle high without the hangover. It seems like he's thought that out pretty well over time. Hobby Champ says, I'd argue the unknown nature of unopened product makes it pretty interesting. Yeah, there's definitely an element of just mystery with that as well. Mark Santu says, Jets fans would be interested. Stuke says, unopened cello and rare packs with stars showing are pretty cool. That's another area within in collecting unopened packs for sure. And Bobby Burrell says, how does the algorithmic directive tie into your modeling? Oh, I think Bobby's trying to compete with a professor now to ask you the most highly technical question, but can you answer that one for Bobby, Tom?
Yeah. So, I try not to solely just
keep this quick. Keep this one.
Yeah. You're like, Tom, I can tell you're being long-winded right now.
Yeah,
I try to do like as little like machine learning driven into everything because I want it to be like more usable, right? But I try to have it more like behavioral driven element into it. Like I have the final say on it is what I'm trying to get at.
There you go. Okay, good. I like that. Keep it simple. Let me ask you about this. And this comes from the conversation we had earlier in the week. And I'm just going to kind of lob this up to you so you can speak to it. But you had mentioned to me about the perceived focus on manufactured scarcity and the dollar value of parallels. And are we losing appreciation of base cards? Could this be leading to forgettable sets? That was one of the things you mentioned you wouldn't mind talking about tonight. Can you speak to that? We're down about 10 minutes, so let's get through this one and maybe we'll start to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it's like when you start thinking about all the numbered parallels, we're kind of not only devaluing base set collecting, but you're also the other end of the spectrum too. Like 101s are going to lose their luster, you know?
Most several have.
Yeah, you're already seeing in play, and it's just really worrisome, like I would love to go back to the days of where like the hit was just the unnumbered short print, but like you knew it was a short print because you researched the set.
Exactly. Yeah. But do you have like, do you take issue with the amount of parallels that we're seeing right now? Do you like, it's kind of funny the way certain parallels become, the darling of the hobby, and then they can change. It can change over time. It can change by sport, by product. And at what point are these things just interchangeable? And does it matter which one it is? And are they all basically the same cards, just with a different skin on them, sort of thing? How important is manufactured scarcity in your mind? Is a card where everything looks the same except the color of the background changes? How different are they really? And are we putting too much weight behind these things where you have the parallel, you got the 1 out of 1, the 1 out of 5, 10, 25, 50, 75, 100, 500, 1,000. You add all those up, you got about 1,500 or whatever that adds up to total cards. Is it what is that? And do you agree with it? And like I love some parallels. I like rare cards, manufactured rarity or organics, natural rarity from vintage stuff. I like it all. Where do you fall on that and what I was just getting at?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use a example from today that just like was a pet peeve or like got me riled at the show. And it was a dealer trying to move a card on me, and they were pointing out like, look, this is numbered out of 75. It's a pink parallel. Like they didn't know who they were dealing with, obviously, but it's just like, I don't know, it grinded my gear because it just highlighted on to like, oh, it's the pink, it's numbered to 75. There's probably a pink that's numbered to a different one. Like this isn't really the case hit anymore. Like, ooh, do you have any of the number to 25s? Do you have it in green? And it's all the same image, but just
Yeah.
different backgrounds. But what I do like about it would be for like casual new collectors. You have more optionality, chances of getting rare in quotations cards.
Rare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Foul Fireball asks, any after hours show tonight? It's been a while since I've had one. Not tonight, especially not tonight. I gotta be up at 4:30 tomorrow to catch an Uber to the airport for an early flight. So not tonight, Foul Fireball. But yeah, we'll be getting some more of those happening in the future. Mark, will I be on next Saturday or I'm on vacation? Yeah, I'm not certain I'm going to have a show next Saturday. As I mentioned at the opening of the show, everybody, but we will see what my accommodations are like and if it's going to make sense and if I'll be able to do this and not keep the family and the kids awake. I will try. Mark Santucci gives the show a 5 out of 5. Much appreciate that, Mark. And Michael here says, I'm over parallel one of ones. I like true one of ones, like a property of where there are no parallels of it. That's a good way to put up a bit of a boundary on what you're collecting. Like I'm always looking for ways to eliminate cards that I want because I want so many, right, Tom? I want so many. I don't have an unlimited bank account. So it's got to be, like most of us, I probably most, if not all of us don't have that. So it's almost like I like to find things that I don't want so that I can just focus on what I do. Okay, you're eliminated. I don't need to worry about you anymore. Actually, today I went through my eBay save searches and I actually deleted, I don't know how many I've got. I probably had 30 or 40 of them. I probably deleted about 12 of them today just because it's like I've been hitting that search every day 10 times for the past several years. Probably have never bought a card through that. Anyway, deleted them. Again, trying to focus. What do you think of all that, Tom?
Yeah. Amazing about the eBay search because like I got notifications today where I forgot I was even tracking it. But yeah, I think consolidation is key more than ever now, especially the life cycle of collecting I'm in. And you really just start to think about like, okay, what do I want to stay with me over the years? What do I want to pass on to my kids?
Right.
What are we going to enjoy?
Yeah. Mike Petty says, you need the gold parallelogram Kabumi exquisite cracked ice aqua banger from a mega box way downtownsies with a replaceable path and fake auto, 3 logos. That pretty much covers the hobby of the last few years right there. 86 says, enjoy your vacation. You deserve it. My vote is no show. Thank you, 86. Robert Scott, manufactured scarcity equals fool's gold. Then everything today is fool's gold because it's all manufactured scarcity. It's all manufactured. We've been putting cards into top sleeves and top loaders right out of the pack for 20 years now, maybe more. So the hobby is all fool's gold, according to Robert Scott's comment here, because it's all manufactured, and some of it isn't so scarce, but it's scarcer than grains of sand on planet Earth. So it's all manufactured scarcity. Therefore, it's all fool's gold, and that means Robert is calling us all fools. Robert, we're proud fools right here. We are proud fools. Bobby Burrell says, amazing how 2 similar cards on a sheet, when cut into cards, one is worth $1,500 and the other is worth $5. And it speaks to Robert Scott's comment earlier right before about fool's gold. Like, what are we doing here? But at the end of the day, that's where the hobby is at now. We are no longer in the 50s and 60s and 70s when people didn't buy cards to keep in great condition. Now it's all about that. And that's all because of money and value, guys. That's what's driving it. So to everyone out there who says that they don't care if their cards go to 0, and listen, I'm not going to project on you, but I say, think completely, think deep. Like, you're really okay if your collection goes down to 0. Now, maybe if you've only spent $500 lifetime, you don't care. But if you spent what is significant in your world, I think you might care a little bit, unless you're just totally wealthy as F. So, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Professor, says, great show. Mike Petty says, bingo, Jer. Thank you so much. Good night, fellow fools, says Mike Petty. Laura, measure twice, cut once. And Bobby Burrell says, ultimate question, Tom, will you leave your cards to your kids? Thus, are you that confident about the future of the hobby and of your work? Great question to end this off with. Thank you, Bobby. Over to you, Tom.
Yes. Yeah. Confident in it. Collecting for my kids. They already know it's their collection. Like, we have family visiting this weekend and they've been showing it off as like, come into the room. Here's collection. Their cards.
Oh, right. That's hilarious. Yeah. They love it. And Dan says, I definitely care if my cards go to 0, but that's not reality. I know that my cards will have value. I'm just not obsessed with the nickels and dimes of it. And I see that. I love that, Dan, because I think what you're saying is, and that's the same with me, I'm not watching the values of my cards on a day-to-day basis. I don't care. Like, I really don't. Like, I don't plan to sell them. I've had to sell cards recently, but I don't plan to sell my cards now for that 25-year horizon that I've always gone into it with. Now, circumstances could change. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'm going to be forced to sell some. You never know. But the plan is not to sell them. And I'm not sitting here watching the ups and downs of the nickel dimes, I think as how Dan is putting it here, day to day, and letting my emotions, be the result of these fluctuating values. Because if you see your collection go from, just use a big number, $100,000 down to $20,000, up to 80, down to 30, up to 150, down, like that can wear on you. I'd rather not even watch it and just, once it is time to sell, when I'm really old, God willing, I get there, or when my estate sells it and after I'm gone, then I care about the value. So anything you'd like to add to that, Tom?
Same sentiment. And it's weird coming from, the analytics guy who's just pitching like all the value he adds, but, collector first, obviously, don't think everything will go to 0, not thinking about value so much right now. Like, if they're for my kids and any one of them, if they were to walk in right now, hopefully they're asleep, but, they would say, ooh, let's open it all. They don't see the value. They see it as like, let's have fun with dad.
Yeah. Stu says, I have nothing into my cards. The hobby has paid for them all. So that's the concept of playing with house money. But however, that's when you have spent money on a card, that's money that you could have. We talked about the opportunity cost earlier. So while you're playing with house money, you could have that money in the bank instead, just saying, but hey, I collect. It's what makes you happy. That's what makes me happy. I'm going to keep on doing it as well. Bobby says the possessional part of my collection is the value I see. And Michael says another great show on Sports Cards Live. Thanks, Jeremy and Tom. Thank you to Michael, who was Linda's first. Appreciate you joining us as always. Laura, we're at $3.48 million on the 79 O-Pee-Chee wax case. This is a case of 16 boxes of 48 wax packs. I think it's 748 or so packs in there. Thanks for keeping us up to date on that, Laura. Tom, we are going to sign off. We're going to end this right away here. I want to take a moment and just say thank you for coming on and confusing the heck out of me and a large component of the audience, I'm sure. But listen, I mean, it was really interesting, and I just want to thank you for coming on. So I'll give you a moment. I'll ask the chat. Get any final comments you guys want here. But Tom, over to you before we sign off.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Great discussion, great conversation. Obviously passionate about data, passionate about the hobby. Glad you didn't fall asleep. That's always like the goal for me. It's like, okay, don't put people to sleep. But yeah, just everyone, you want to follow up, reach out to me on Instagram. DMs are always open. Pancake Analytics.
There you have it, everybody. Thank you again, Tom. Thank you to Bobby. Says a great show. Stukes, thank you so much. Craig's Cards, thank you very much. Chris Hoge from Card Ladder, co-founder of Card Ladder, is here. Says, well done, fellas. Laura, thank you so much. And yes, next time we see Tom is buying the pancakes. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As I've said, I'm on vacation tomorrow for 12 days. I'm taking the computer with me. We'll see if we can do some shows, but if not, we'll see you when I'm back. So have a great Sunday tomorrow, everybody. A great week ahead. And with that, this episode of Sports Cards Live with Tom Ferrara, Pancake Analytics, here on February the 24th, 2024 is now over.